so.
Osmosis.
Yes. Dialogue Decalogue. Leonard Swidler had noticed that people tend to not discuss things, but debate. And in fact, he realized that debate was disappearing and being replaced by arguing, yelling, demeaning, and ultimately, topics such as religion, anything that deals with our ideologies, was getting harder and harder to discuss. So he came up with 10 rules, or as they're phrased here, 10 commandments, so that when we are talking to somebody of a different religion, a different ideology than ours, we have some basic concept of how we might be able to have a conversation with them. The Dialogue Decalogue has been adopted and adapted to in various ways. There's an entire institute known as the Dialogue Institute. There is a link on Canvas to that, as well as a link to the complete version of the Dialogue Decalogue. There has been an adaptation of these 10 rules that was actually used by the UN as well. And they have been proven, they've been shown that when people will abide by them, things change when it comes to a conversation or a discussion. So rule 1, let's go a little more deeply into this than that short initial statement. Primary purpose of dialogue is to learn, that is to change and grow in the perception and understanding of reality and then to act accordingly. We said this was easy because we are naturally curious. We ask questions because we want to know the answers. Should you ask a question if you're not prepared for the answer? Oh, no. But this rule can be difficult because sometimes we're not here to learn. Sometimes we're not open to an answer. We ask a question, but then as soon as somebody starts answering, we're no longer listening. What are we doing? Coming up with our next response. We're not willing to listen to the answer to the question because we're not willing to learn, to actually hear the other person. In studying religion, in any field that you are going into, there is going to be a variety of opinions and views and thoughts. Archaeology right now, there are a lot of different dates going on because of just in the past 1 to 3 years, they've found various places that are now leading to questions on when different places in the world started having civilizations. More recently, there have been a few news articles about a village that was discovered up in British Columbia, where the remains look like they are older than some of the pyramids possibly. Changes the dates. So whenever we go into our field of study, whatever it might be, why do we have to make sure that we are willing to ask questions and learn? Pretty simple. We won't advance if we don't. Yeah. We'll be stuck and the entire field will keep moving around us, and we're now the old person in Ivory Tower who's still basing their lectures off of materials from 50 years ago, which results in students not getting newer information. So we have to make sure that we're always ready to learn. This will show up actually in a lot of world religions where there's this notion in religion that we have to be, or we have to come to the divine like a child, open to learn. All right, so rule 2, interreligious, inter-ideological dialogue must be a two-sided project within each religious or ideological community and between said communities. Why should this rule be easy?
It's a lot it's simple in the sense that people naturally desire fairness and justice in being able to present themselves and receive.
Yeah.
People just like to be fair and equal with each other.
If we're there to learn, this rule is a natural step. I'm here because you're going to speak and I'm going to speak. It's a two-sided discussion. We're able to hear each other because we're also both here to learn. Why or when is this rule difficult?
Well, if it doesn't line up with your beliefs or your views, the other side, it's a little difficult.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. I'm not really wanting to listen to you. What I want to do is lecture you because I saw what you did, ... And now I'm going to talk to you from a state of judgment. We'll come back to how some of the later rules address that very situation. All right. Rule 3. Each participant must come to the dialogue with honesty and sincerity. Conversely, each participant must, there's an interesting word right there, assume a similar complete honesty and sincerity in the other partners. Why should this rule be easy?
We said because to be honest in a dialogue is easier because you're really just stating your perspective, so it's naturally truthful.
We should naturally be able to speak about what is our passion, what we feel so strongly about. We should be able to be honest. We should be able to be authentic about who we are. However, why is this rule difficult?
You've got to assume that the other person is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You assume it. And it's an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
You never know.
Exactly.
And it's hard to it's difficult to empathize with others who also have different beliefs.
Is it sometimes just to be honest yourself, though? What happens, have any of you ever been to a movie and you loved it? You thought everything about this movie was fantastic. And you're going to meet up with friends, or you're logging into Facebook to talk to friends, whichever. And as you're reading other friends' posts, or as you're approaching the conversation, you hear your friends talking about how horrible the movie was, how it wasn't worth the money spent, the music, the lighting, anything and everything to do with this movie was wrong. It didn't fit the canon of the series. Is it sometimes difficult to be completely honest and sincere about your thoughts in that situation? We'd like to think it's easy, but sometimes we actually end up toning it down a bit. We're like, well, I actually kind of liked this part. You're sending out feelers to see if there's anyone who might begin to agree with you. Because we want to feel accepted. We want to feel like there's somebody else who observed something similar to us. All right, let's go on to the next rule. Rule 4, interreligious, inter-ideological dialogue. We must not compare ideas with practice, but rather ideas within ideas and practice with practice. Why is this rule difficult?
It's hard to separate what people do and what they say.
We would love to think that what we think is how we act. What we believe is how we do, how we practice. This rule is difficult because we have to, A, get over the fact that that's not the case for ourselves, and B, get over the fact that we can't judge somebody else. We should not judge somebody else's practice based on our ideas. In a debate, in an argument where somebody is arguing on the side of the idealistic way something should be done, and somebody is talking about the behaviors, who usually comes out on top?
Behavior.
You sure? Think about it. Which one usually wins? Which one sounds better?
Oh, the idea.
The ideal
Yeah.
sounds better. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we make this rule easy? We let go of our bias. We realize that we are not perfect. We understand that beliefs and practices are two different things. Unfortunately, I now have a song, Little Dicky, that gets stuck in my head when I say this. But it's apples and oranges. And yes, you can compare apples and oranges, but at the same time, it's better to compare different types of apples and different types of oranges before you try to compare apples to oranges. So you look at how this religion, this tribe has a practice of going to the lake and taking the baby and putting the baby into the water that it might be cleansed and purified and connected with the divine spirit of earth. And this other religion has a ritual where they take the water or take a child, and the child is immersed in water so that they can be cleansed and purified and connected to the divine God above. We can look at the practices and we can compare the practices. We can look at the ideas and compare the ideas. And then we can look at it as a whole and compare. If we try to do the ideas of one and the practice of the other, it's not going to be as easily compatible. It's going to cause more dissension in that discussion. All right, rules 5, 6, and 7 all put together really closely. So, rule 5, each participant must define himself. Conversely, the one interpreted must be able to recognize herself in the interpretation. Why should this be easy?
Because by understanding who we are, it makes it easier for us to be empathetic with other people.
Good. Do you think most of us can define who we are? Yeah. Should be easy to know who you are. It should be easy to know who we are so you can empathize. It helps. It's important. Can this rule be difficult? Why?
Because people can be prideful and stuck in their own ways, and they'll become undeniable about certain stuff that other people will see. But once it gets told to them, they'll think that it's true.
We get stuck in a notion of who we are. It goes back in part to the beliefs and practices. But then it pulls in this other notion. Aren't we all changing? We talked about in the last class that over time our beliefs and practices change. So here's this rule saying that we must be able to define who we are, but then other people, when they look at us, they should be able to see that definition. You have a girl walking in with cut off shorts and a tight tank top, and she tells you that she's Amish. Exactly. The laughs, that is enough of a response because it doesn't fit. But then you hear that she's on her Rumspringa. So now all of a sudden your definition of what it means to the Amish might have to change a bit. Because here's this person who identifies as it. This rule can be incredibly difficult. Not so much in the first part where you have to be able to define yourself, but in that second part, other people recognize that definition when they look at you. If you have a person come in and they will say that they can't have pork because they're Jewish, but then they order a cheeseburger, and you might wonder, well, wait a minute, they're eating milk, dairy, and meat at the same meal, which is not kosher. So there's always that question of figuring out how to understand what a person is. And so this is where the next two rules are so important. Number 6, each participant must come to a dialogue with no hard, fast assumptions as to where points of disagreement are. Why is this rule so difficult to follow?
It's easy because most people, or it's difficult, I guess, because everyone has their own opinion and you can be quick to assume that someone's wrong. Like if we think that we're right, then we're not going to say that someone else is right.
We think we're right. That other person's wrong. Even if we have heard and can see the definition, even if we're able to separate beliefs and practices, even if we're there to learn, we can still find this rule difficult because we have such a notion or understanding that not only might we be correct, but what we're familiar with tells us this. So we have these assumptions, we make stereotypes. 3 women walking door to door, long skirt, Jehovah's Witness. 2 gentlemen riding their bike in the neighborhood, coming door to door, Mormon. The girl wearing a head covering, Muslim. But the fact is, there are other options available, but we have this assumption. What do you think is one of the biggest, one or two of the biggest things that make this rule so difficult, that we experience daily? Any thoughts? Every day we're fed information. We see memes on Facebook. We see articles from the news. Do you think many of these articles are biased?
Yes.
Do you think many of these memes make assumptions?
Yes.
When we're fed that all day long, do you think it makes it harder to let go of assumptions?
Yes.
Let's say you had a person in some remote island and the only news they ever heard was about some Christian who predicted the end of the world a few years ago, Christians who were destroying sacred texts of other religions, and news articles about the Westboro Baptist Church and actions that they were taking. Now you live on this island and you're of another religion, and you find out that the person who's moving in next door is Christian. Yeah. It might be hard for you to follow this rule. So, how do we turn this around? Why is this rule easy?
It should be easy because people should be taught to be open-minded and not judge other people based on stuff that they have no knowledge of.
We shouldn't judge people based on things we have no knowledge. Yeah. Start following that, this rule becomes a bit easier. Let's go one step further. And I do want to see a raise of hands on this one. Has anyone in this room ever been judged, put into a category, labeled, or assumed to be a certain way because of age, race, religion, economic status, clothing styles, weight, eyesight, sexual preferences? Every single person in this room should be able to raise, yes, and every single person is raising their hand. Now, how often were those assumptions wrong? Most of the time. Most of the time, those assumptions are wrong. Did it feel good to have somebody assume something based on the label that may or may not even fit you? No. Like I said, these rules fit together, especially with Rule Form 5, because on one part we need to define ourselves, but that's a very sticky thing. Because when we start defining ourselves, we start using labels, and somebody else says, oh, well, you're this, but doesn't mean you're also that. Now, it didn't feel good when somebody labeled you. It didn't feel good when somebody made an assumption based on that label. Do you want others to feel the way that you felt? No. When you can realize that, this rule becomes easy. When you realize that you don't want others to assume things about you, then why assume things about others? Most importantly, Rule 5 is, in essence, the golden rule. Using the phrase assume. Do not assume, do not stereotype, do not generalize others unless you're willing to be stereotyped, generalized, and have assumptions about you. Let go of the assumptions, because the girl really is Amish, even if she's wearing the cutoff shorts and the tight tank top. She really is. All right, we're actually going to stop at Rule 6. We'll pick up on Rule 7 next class, which is on Thursday.